Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to whip up a coconut cake, which we'll decorate later tonight when we're making ravioli and stuff like that. And we're going to whip up our pasta dough for our ravioli, as well as a focaccia, a sourdough focaccia, and then we're going to make some chicken tenders for the kiddos for lunch. So kind of a big full stream, but let's start by getting our coconut cake ready so that we can get it in the oven baking. So we are going to start out with 3/4 of a cup of butter, which is the same as 1.5 sticks. So make sure you get all of this. This is the coconut cake I make every single year for my stepdad's birthday. It's his favorite. It's kind of like a southern coconut cake, but just delicious, very coconutty. So 3/4 cup of butter. And then we're going to add in a 1/4 cup of oil. And the mixture of the butter and the oil together really makes it nice and lighter than if you do all butter. But the butter flavor is so nice. So we'll add that in there. And then we're going to add in 2 cups of granulated sugar. So 1, 2. And we're going to cream the butter, oil, and sugars together. Once they're nice and kind of creamed, then we'll add in our next kind of sets of ingredients. But this is really important to making sure your cake is just delicious.
What kind of oil?
So I just used olive oil on there, but you can use coconut oil would be great if you had it. I never really have anything but olive oil. It's such a small amount, it's not going to make a difference in the flavor because coconut extract is going in here, which will give it such a strong flavor. But you could use a vegetable oil or, avocado oil. Any oil you want, really. Okay, let's get these kind of creamed up. And you want to make sure your butter is room temperature so that it will, of course, cream nicely together. Okay. That looks pretty good. Now, for our next part is we're going to be separating some eggs because we're going to actually use some of these eggs for our, or these yolks, extra yolks for our pasta. Our cake needs 6 egg whites and 2 egg yolks. So we're going to kind of separate, which means I'm going to have 4 egg yolks left over, which I'm going to count as 2 whole eggs when I'm making my egg pasta. But I've got to separate them. So I'm going to just put this over here for now. And that way, and we need them separated because for this cake, you're going to whip your egg whites separately and then you'll fold them in at the end, which is going to give you a fluffier cake. It will have a little bit more body than if you try to do it all at the same time. So, all that. So much for trying to separate that first one. Okay, so 1 yolk. There we go. 2 yolks. So we've got 2 down. And since I'm here, I'm just going to do the rest, and then I'll save these yolks for our pasta later. And I've always just done the scoop the egg back and forth between your eggshell, but you can always just kind of put them in and then scoop them out with your fingers as well. There's lots of different ways to kind of separate your eggs. But you want to make sure you get around each one is kind of a really snotty piece of egg white, and you want to make sure that comes off when you separate. You see that part? There you go. And then we have 1 more. There. Just a couple more times just to make sure it's completely separate. Okay, we'll save these egg whites for later. We're going to whip up, and then these are going to go for our pasta, which is actually wonderful because you can make pasta dough with just the yolks. I like to use both the egg whites and the yolks, but we'll sub out some of our whole eggs for just yolks. So it will make a really rich, deep yellow pasta on it. Let's cream our 2 egg yolks into our coconut cake, our butter and our sugar base. There we go. Kind of nice and making it nice and fluffy. And now we can add in our baking powder, salt, vanilla, and coconut extract. I'm going to put my lid on my olive oil because knowing me, I'll knock it over, and whew, oil is not a fun thing to clean up. Okay, for this, we need a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. There we go. And then we're going to add in 1 whole tablespoon of baking powder. So we've got our baking powder in there. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then a whole teaspoon of coconut extract. And that coconut extract is going to give you a lot more of the coconut flavor. We are going to be using coconut milk in here. And then when we decorate the cake, I'll make a coconut frosting and we'll put shredded sweetened coconut over it. But the coconut extract is where you're going to get a lot of that coconut flavor because it's just a very strong form. So we need 1 teaspoon of it. And a little bit of this goes a long way. And this is going to, again, give you that just subtle coconut flavor in here. Let's whip these guys in. Here. Okay. You just want to make sure it gets all kind of whipped around. So it's all incorporated. And then for our next part, we need 1 1/3 cups of coconut milk, which is a little bit less than a can, but most of it. So let me grab a measuring cup here. And you want coconut milk, not coconut cream. Coconut cream is very, very thick and sweet, so you just want the coconut milk. But canned, not fresh coconut milk like in your things. They're different. They have different flavors on there. So we want 1 1/3 cup, but we're not pouring it all in at one time.
What brand hand mixer is that?
This is a Cuisinart on there, so I love it. It comes with like a little standing base and has all the different attachments on it. I've had this for 16 years now. I do have it in my Amazon storefront because it has lasted 16 years, which tells me that it's pretty darn good. We want 1 1/3 cup of our coconut milk. Getting it right there. Perfect. So you have just a smidge left over on there, but make sure you shake it up well before you put it in there so that like the coconut solids all get mixed around. We're not going to pour this all in there at one time. We need 3 cups of flour. We're going to add in a cup of flour and then some coconut milk, cup of flour, then coconut milk, and a cup of flour, coconut milk. So you kind of alternate, but you're going to divide your flour and your thirds and your milk. And that just allows it to kind of incorporate together a lot nicer. And then at the end, we'll whip up our egg whites until they've gotten to kind of a stiff peak, and then we'll fold those in. Now you can use cake flour if you want to, but regular flour works well. Cake flour will give you a slightly lighter cake. But we're going to add in our first cup. And then we're going to add in part of our coconut milk. And we're going to cream these 2 together. And it will be a thicker batter until we have those egg whites folded in, which will make it a lot lighter. And there we go. Making sure I've got it all mixed around. Okay. Now we'll do another cup of flour and another portion of our coconut milk. And you can see with canned coconut milk, you have these little coconut solids on it, which I think give you a lot more coconut flavor than when you buy like the carton of fresh coconut milk. That's why I say you got to use canned. I'm going to mix this in. And then all the way around. Beautiful. And then we'll get our last cup in here and our last of our coconut milk. Here we go. And then we're going to whip this together all the way around. Then we'll get a spatula and kind of finish it up for that first part for it. Let me pop this over here because we're done with our flour on this part. We'll put our coconut milk in. And then I'm going to take a spatula right now to start and get some of these little milk solids, these coconut things. You want to get that all in there because it's going to, again, add that flavor. And we're going to cream this together. And then we'll take a spatula around and make sure everything kind of gets incorporated. And then we'll fold in our egg whites once we've gotten them nice and beaten to kind of a stiff but not a dry peak. There we go. Okay, so we've got this part. I'm going to go through with my spatula here in just a second. Because we can do our mixing now, but once we get into our egg whites, once we get them, we'll fold them in because we don't want to deflate them. So get your mixing in now. Make sure you don't have any flour pockets anywhere. You can see we have quite a thick base right now, but this will thin out a lot once we get our egg whites going. Okay, so now we're going to whisk up our egg whites. So I've got my stand mixer because honestly, this is the best way to whisk egg whites. Otherwise, it's just really difficult. Takes forever with a hand mixer. So we're going to add in our 6 egg whites here. And then just to kind of help them keep their base form, we're going to add in 1/8 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar. Again, that just helps keep their form on it. Now that's an optional. You don't need to use it if you don't want to. You don't need a whole lot. There we go. So a couple little, there we go. It's barely any, but again, it helps. And then we're gonna put this up and then we'll start to whisk these until they have a nice peak on them. And you wanna do it nice and at the highest thing. While we're doing that, and those are whisking, we can get our cake tins ready. So I've got parchment paper that I cut out little circles for to be right around the right, the size in here. But we're still going to spray them down so that they all kind of fit in there nicely. So we're going to spray all the way around. And then you're going to pop your little, put in here. Now this can make 3 9-inch cake pans. I like to do a smaller, taller cake. That way you get like those really cool slices. Make sure it's well oiled up so that you again get that good pop out at the end. And we're gonna do, I'm just gonna do 5. I think 5 will be good. Save this. Let's check out our egg whites. We're getting there. We're at like kind of a soft peak right now. You can kind of see when it's a soft peak is when you kind of pull them out and you flip it. I'll show you guys so you can kind of see it. But it like just bends over. We want it to really hold itself kind of firm, but not to where they are dry. So it probably needs, maybe like 30 seconds to a minute more of whisking on here. There. And you can kind of tell by when you are beating it, you start to see them form up on the sides. And so I'm already starting to see them kind of there, and they're less bubbly and a little bit more shiny. Okay. I think we're pretty good here. Let's see. Yep, that should be about good. And you see they hold their form well. A soft peak, when you try to peek it, it will collapse over. Now what we're going to do is we are going to fold our egg whites in here. So I'm going to dump them all in here right now, and then we'll fold them in. Here, got to get all of this, but this is 6 egg whites with a little bit of cream of tartar. And again, that cream of tartar helps it hold itself a little bit better than straight up whipping them, which will just make this have a little bit more fluffiness. Okay, now we're just gonna fold this in. So folding is simply reaching that batter up from the bottom and kind of dropping it over. This way, those eggs kind of get mixed in very kind of evenly into the mixture versus stirring them around. It allows it just to incorporate a little bit easier. Let's kind of get around here. There we go. Once it starts to thin out a little bit, it gets a lot easier to incorporate the last little bits of this. And this is going to make our cake just have such a wonderful, like light and fluffy kind of texture to it. And again, try not to over mix because that will lead to a less fluffy cake. We're almost there. There. I'm trying to let the egg and the batter fall with each other. So it might take a little bit, but you don't want to just rush it and try to mix it too fast. Scrape that around. And you'll know that it's all incorporated once you kind of see all of the white fluff gone. There we go. We're just about there. A few more folds in. Pretty close. There we go. And you can see that it makes this cake batter just so much lighter than it was before, but you're still going to get that great flavor from a butter batter, but you'll have a little bit more fluffiness to it. Okay, let's get these guys in here. Again, make sure your pans are well oiled. That way, when you are taking your cake out later, it will pop on out easily. We're going to start, I'm just going to start by evenly scooping into each one. Again, this will make 3 9-inch circle kind of cake pans. So I'm breaking mine down into smaller ones so I can get more of a tall kind of cake for it. Just gives you more of that bougie little, like, bigger stack, more layers of frosting in there. And you know, the funny things are, these aren't even cake pans. They were originally bought back in like the early 2000s as deep dish pizza pans from Williams and Sonoma. But they are perfect for making like tall cakes and perfect for chicken pot pies. So they get used for a lot of things other than deep dish pizzas.
Have you ever used them for deep dish pizza?
I have used them for deep dish pizzas. I actually used them earlier in this year for pizzas when I went out of town, and I left these, I made these up, prepped them up for you to bake. He doesn't remember. But I guess they weren't true deep dish pizzas, not like a Giordano's deep dish pizza, which is so good.
You got a question? Do you know what's for dinner tonight?
I do know what's for dinner tonight. So every year, this is my stepdad's birthday, I make him ravioli with meatballs, and I do a meat and cheese filling on it. And so I'm making homemade ravioli, and then I make a salad, which is kind of like, there's a restaurant here in town called Maggiano's, and it's their house salad, and I recreate it with bacon, tomatoes, red onions, this homemade dressing on it, gorgonzola cheese. So I make that as well. And then I'm going to have focaccia, and then, of course, our coconut cake. Let's get all of this batter out because we don't want any of it to go to waste. There we go. And then I'm about to give these a little tap tap. And into the oven, they can bake. And they will have just the loveliest coconut flavor. So just a little shake around. And this will get any big air pockets out because, again, we have those eggs in there. So just kind of like when you're making a macaroon, how you got to like tap it. And let's get these in the oven to bake. These are going to bake at 350 for about 21 minutes, give or take, depending on, how full I have them or whatnot. Since they're a lighter cake, they bake a lot faster. They're in a smaller container. So if you have them in a 9-inch cake pan, those might take a little bit longer, okay, because you have the base. Let's get these guys in here. There we go. I'm going to set my timer for 21 minutes. And then as long as when you put it in, like a fork or a knife comes out clean, or they've got a nice solid base in the middle of it, then they'll be ready to come out. So let's work on right now. Let's work on our chicken that we can fry up our chicken tenders. Then we will work on our focaccia and our egg pasta on here. So let me get our right over here. And so we'll need a little bit more space in here. It's kind of got to shift over here what we're doing. Okay, let's make our seasoned dredge. We'll trim up our chicken. That way we can get these frying up. And then we'll make our focaccia for tonight and our pasta.
Can you go over the ingredients for the coconut cake?
Yes, so the coconut cake, we use sugar, flour, eggs. So we use 2 egg yolks and 6 egg whites. So there's more egg whites to it. And then we used coconut extract, coconut milk, vanilla extract, baking powder, salt, butter, oil. Yep, and I think that's it on there. Now I have everything is listed in or we'll like post our lives so that you can always rewatch and make this cake along with us again. Again, I make this cake every year for my stepdad's birthday because it is so good. And it has just the right coconut and everything. Okay, we've got about 1.5 cups of flour. We're going to add in about a tablespoon or so of onion powder. I'm just doing a really basic fried chicken tenders for the kids tonight because we're having ravioli. So this is just a simple lunch for them. We're adding in some Italian seasoning. I got a teaspoon there. We're going to add in about a teaspoon or so of oregano. I told the kids, I was like, I'm not going to go too crazy on lunch today. You guys can have fruit and I'll make chicken tenders, which is one of their favorites. So they're always happy with that, at least. We'll do a little bit of paprika. That will give it a nice kind of golden brown color. And then some garlic salt, to about a tablespoon. We'll mix this up. We'll whip up our eggs, then I'll cut my chicken up and we'll get ready to fry it. And that can cook while we make our focaccia and our dough for our pasta. Now, if you've never made fresh pasta before, it is a labor of love because it is an extremely stiff dough that requires a lot of kneading in the beginning. But then you wrap it up in plastic wrap, and after a couple of hours, that flour hydrates and it's much easier to work with. But you need a stiff dough so that it will won't get soggy when you boil it. It's just very, very difficult to work with in the beginning. It's very challenging, but the rewards later, it's so delicious. And you can't skimp out on the kneading because the kneading is what's going to give you a velvety, soft noodle. If you don't knead it enough in the beginning, it will give you a rock hard noodle. So it's not difficult, but it is a labor. Okay. Let's whisk these eggs. And that way we'll have our egg dredge, pop our yolk here, and mix it up. And then we'll add some panko breadcrumbs to this after we do our initial dredging. But we'll get this going. Okay, and then let's get our oil cooking up so that we can kind of fry and get it nice and hot so it's ready to start frying when we're done with everything. We don't need a whole lot because I don't need each chicken tender to be kind of submerged. I just need enough for them to have about halfway done. So I just kind of make a nice thin kind of layer on here. It's about a cup or so. And then once you add the chicken in, it raises the level and it will allow it to kind of cook up nice and evenly. We're going to put our heat. I'm going to start it on high, but once we go to fry, I'll drop it down to about a 4 or 5. So it's not too hot and it'll give you kind of a perfect golden fry to it. Okay. Let's get our chicken ready. So I've got 2 chicken breasts here. We are going to fillet them in half. That way they are thinner. And try when you're doing it to cut against the grain. So it will give you a rougher cut, but it will give you a more tender chicken tender because you're breaking up those fibers as you go, which that causes them to kind of release so that your chicken is more tender and kind of falls apart a little bit more. And then any natural breaks in the chicken is where I try to make my tenders on here. And now knowing that when I go to kind of coat them, they're going to increase in size. So they'll be a lot bigger than this once we go to fry them. So here's kind of like a natural break. Here. And I always try to make them in kind of like triangle type things. Just gives you almost like a piece to dip. Here we go. Okay. Now, leave your knife hand clean. We'll go through and dredge. That way we can pop our panko breadcrumbs in here and you'll have something to work with. You know, I always try to, when you're doing dredging worth it, if you can keep one hand clean, it will just make it a lot easier. Okay. Let's get these guys coated up with our first coated. We can kind of just roll them in here. And you want to make sure that the dredge is well seasoned because this coating is what's going to really stick on your chicken. The second coating, most of it sticks on, but you want to make sure you have all of that really great flavor on there from the beginning because you don't want to have a bland chicken tender. If you're going through the work of it, make sure it's well seasoned. So it might seem like you've added a lot of spices or seasoning, but trust me, you've got a big piece of meat that you need to season up first. Now we're going to add in some seasoned panko breadcrumbs, about a cup or so. This is going to give you an extra kind of crunchiness to the chicken. Gives you a nicer texture here. But if you don't have panko breadcrumbs or breadcrumbs, you can also use crushed crackers, potato chips, pretzels. Seen a lot of different things used to give you that. Cornflakes, like the unsweetened ones. And then into the egg wash and kind of pat this down. Helps it hold it on. You could use Cheez-It. I have used Goldfish before when I didn't have anything, and it actually works out fairly well on there. You can also actually throw in Parmesan cheese and add some Parmesan cheese to it. It gives you a really crispy because it will fry up and crisp up in there.
Can you go over the seasonings for the dredge?
Yes, so I kept it really simple. It's onion powder, paprika, Italian seasoning, oregano, and garlic salt. So pretty simple, basic, kind of, a neutral flavor to it. But you can really do anything. You can add Cajun spices in here to make it spicy. Sometimes if I'm having it with Greek food, I'll throw in Greek spices or herbes de Provence, depending on what flavor profiles I want to go in there. So you can really change the spice up, and it can give it a different flavor, which is nice. Take something that is a basic and you can have it fit whatever meal you're, kind of cooking. Here. So sometimes I'll throw ranch seasoning in there if I want to do like a crispy ranch chicken. You can put the powder ranch seasoning in there as well. Coat this up. Now, when you do chicken tenders, so I use 3 eggs, you typically need a little bit more egg and dredge for tenders than you do if you're doing the whole filet, just because you've got a little bit more surface area that you're covering up. But the tenders tend to cook up a little bit faster because, of course, they're smaller, so they cook up nicer. But double the dredging work. Now, another reason why I like to just dredge with one hand is just you leave one hand nice and clean. That way, when you need to go wash your hands, you've got a clean hand to turn on your sink or to tend to your oil or anything else, because something always arises when your hands are fully dredged. It's always some emergency. You got to open something, or you know what I mean. That's when the kids come in, they're like, I need you right now. And I'm like, I've got my hands covered in raw meat. Here. Get this coated up nicely. And now for tonight, for those who are going to join us for our ravioli making, we are going to be making it earlier tonight because since we're having my parents over for dinner and they're not as late of a night owls as we are and late eaters, we will actually be kind of starting that around like 6:30ish for that to start making it. So that way we can eat a little bit earlier for them, because they're like the 5:30 special people. And we're the late night specials. The restaurant's about to close special. Okay, our oil's getting there. We're just about ready with our dredge. We've got one more after this. Kind of coat it up, and then I'll test my oil. I'll know when it's nice and hot is when you put either a drop of water and it just a small one, and if it sizzles right away, you know that it's ready. But typically by the time you're done dredging, your oil's hot enough. Now remember, I turn my oil on high to start it, but when I go to fry it, I'm going to turn it down. I like my oil a little bit hotter to start because once we throw this chicken in, it's going to cool everything down. Okay, let's get this hands washed. And that way, we can get our chicken going. Okay, let me get a little drop of water. When I say a little, just a little. We should be able to, there we go. Looks like we have a good sizzle. I'm going to turn it down to about a 5. I'll grab my tongs here and we'll put our chicken in there to start sauteing. Now, we don't want to crowd our chicken when we throw it in there. You want to make sure that it has a little ring of oil around each piece, not that they're not touching each other. That way they can cook evenly and they'll crisp up evenly. So just leave a little like oil canal between each piece. Okay, and I think I can get one more right there. Actually, I can get one more on top of this. I want to try to be able to do this in just 2 fries. There we go. And then we'll let that cook up. While that's cooking up, let me grab a baking sheet out so we can have it ready to transfer when they're done. And then we're going to work on our focaccia and our egg dough.
Question: what kind of oil are you using, and how do you like that pan?
I am using olive oil, which is kind of my main oil that I use for everything. And it works out perfectly because I like to cook my chicken over roughly 350 degrees so that it cooks a little bit slower and gives you a perfect kind of golden brown crust on it. If you cook your chicken too high, it will burn before you have it cooked all the way through. And so also using olive oil prevents you from going too high with your temperature on it. This is the Hexclad 12-inch frying pan. Absolutely love it. I got a set a couple years ago. So I have the 10-inch and the 8-inch, and then I also have a griddle pan. Love them. I have not destroyed them. They've survived me, which I can't say for most of my other non-stick pans that I've used in the past. And they conduct heat really well. They're really, really easy to clean. So that's kind of a win for me because if something's easy to clean, then it means less time at the end of the day. Used and clean here. Before we start our pasta, let's whip up our focaccia dough that we're going to make for later. We're going to do a sourdough one. So I've got my discard. I need a little, I've got olive oil over here. We're just going to do a pretty simple one. I'm going to turn on my water here to start warming up because I need a cup of warm water. But we need 1 cup of our sourdough discard and then a cup of warm water. And then we're going to add in 3 cups of flour and then about 1/4 cup of olive oil and some seasoning to kind of get us for our dough. And it's going to just sit and kind of for a while, and then we'll put it in our like we'll stretch it out on a baking sheet and then let it rise again. So we've got 1 cup of our sourdough discard. You can also use starter. Either one works well for this because this is going to be sitting for a long time until dinner time. So it will have lots of time to activate and get nice and bubbly. There we go. Let's see if my water's warm over here. It is. I can grab my water.
Do you have any videos of how to make a starter?
I do have a whole collection of videos on how you can make your very own starter, as well as a recipe card available for everybody. Because it does take a hot minute to do it. It's about 7 days before you have a starter that's active enough to be able to make bread from. But I do have videos available. It only takes about 5 minutes a day to feed it and get it ready. But you just need to make sure you have like unbleached flour and a jar and like some, cheesecloth or cover to kind of get on there for it. But I have that available for it. And then I also have a video on how you can make your very own sourdough bread once you have your starter developed. Okay, we're going to take our sourdough here. We're going to dilute it in our water base here. And then we're going to add in our salt. And I'm going to add in some rosemary because I love that flavor. And so that's going to kind of be in our focaccia inside our dough. We're going to do about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then we're going to do around 1 teaspoon or so of rosemary, maybe a little less because we'll sprinkle some on top. And then we want about 1/4 cup of olive oil to go in here, which is perfect. And we're going to use more olive oil later for coating up our focaccia because the olive oil makes this a chewy and crunchy at the same time. So we've got our liquid base here. We're going to go and let me check on, before we add our flour in, I want to check on my chicken tenders here and see how they are looking. Beautiful. So I'm going to flip them. Perfect. You see our chicken tenders, they cook up much faster than a like a big old breast or fillet. Perfect. Gorgeous. I've got my pan at 4. I'm going to rotate here. Bring my hot side to this one.
Can you recap what's in the bowl so far for the pasta?
Yeah, or this is for our focaccia, which is going to be for our later. We're going to make our pasta in just a second. So we have in here, we have 1 cup of our sourdough starter, 1 cup of our warm water, a fourth a cup of olive oil, about a teaspoon and a half of salt, and a little shy of a teaspoon of rosemary. And then we're going to add in 3 cups of flour. And this will be our base to it. We'll do some stretch and pulls for the next hour to 2 hours, and then we'll lay it out on a baking sheet. We'll coat it in oil, and then lay it out on a baking sheet and let it kind of poof up from there. But this gives you that kind of, focaccia. It's a thinner, crustier, chewier bread. It's almost like you can cut it into breadstick shapes, which I like to do. So we kind of give nice little long rectangles for everyone, but it's so delicious. So we're going to mix in our flour here. And this is going to be, it's a little bit higher hydration. So it's going to have a little bit of tack to it, but not quite as tacky as a regular sourdough bread.
Is that self-rising flour or not?
Nope, just regular all-purpose flour for this. We use the sourdough starter in here. That's what's gonna leaven this. And it can be a discard. It just has to be fed within the last 24 hours. So I fed mine yesterday. It doesn't have to be super active for this to have there, because there is so much of a wait time for it proofing. We're gonna give this a quick little knead. It's a little bit tacky, which you want on there, but not as tacky or high hydration as a regular sourdough loaf of bread. Kind of mixing it around. Beautiful. And then, so just like every 30 minutes for the next hour to 2, you're just going to give a quick little knead on it after it's had a chance to hydrate in that flour. And then we'll stretch it out and form it. Okay, let me wash my hands. And we're going to get ready for our pasta making, which, again, is a labor of love. I'm going to clear up this air because I'm going to need some kneading space, because you're going to need this, and it's going to be a hard, stiff dough. So don't do this on a day that you focus on an arm workout, or you'll be exhausted. Just push that out of the way. So we have in here 4 egg yolks, which I'm going to count as 2 whole eggs. So we're going to use 6 eggs in our pasta today.
You have a question. Do you cook like this every day?
No, this is a special meal. I do make most of my stuff homemade, but I do not make homemade pasta all the time, because homemade pasta is, like I said, a labor of love. I do make homemade bread, and I'll do homemade chicken tenders and stuff like that a lot. But pasta is a whole nother thing. It's delicious, but a lot of work. Okay, let's go check on our cake real quick before we get into our dough. And then our first round of chicken tenders should be about ready to come off here. Now we want to test to see if they're ready to come out. Again, depending on what size baking tray you use. I'm going to tell you right now, these already need a little bit more time, because you can see they're jiggly here. Our back ones are closer. I'm going to do a little rotation here as best I can. There we go. Push some of these in the back, but these still need a lot more time. Woo. Sliding them around here. There we go. Okay, I'm going to say probably at least a good 5, maybe 8 more minutes on there. I always try to make sure I undershoot them so that I don't have, let's do 7 right in the middle, so that I don't have them over baked before I get there. But we're close on a lot of them. So I'm actually going to do a little bit less. We'll do 5 minutes and check them in 5 minutes here. Let's get our chicken out. We'll put our next round in, because these are looking beautiful. So when you take your chicken out, you don't want to put them on just a flat surface. You either want to put them on a cookie cooling rack, or I like to do on paper towels because it soaks up that extra oil in there and leaves a nice crispy chicken behind. Put it hot oil side down. That absorbs the most. Again, leaving it nice and crispy. And then we'll get our last set in here. There we go. I want to make sure I leave some paper towel room over there. A lot of times I'll spread them out too much, and then my second round I don't have a space for them. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to drop my next round in here to fry up. There we go. And again, keep your oil lower. I've got it cooking over just barely a 4. That way it gets golden brown like this and it can cook all the way through. You don't have to worry about it being undercooked because it's had plenty of time to cook in there. I think that's a lot of people's mistake in the beginning when they're doing fried chicken is they have their oil too hot. And so they cook the chicken part and then all of a sudden they open it up and it's raw inside because the outside looked done, but that was because the oil was too hot. And then if you try to cook it till it's done, then you burn it. So low and slow wins the race with the fried chicken. Okay, let me bring my temperature right here. I'm going to wash my hands and then we're going to get on our pasta making. Okay. Get a little fork here. So 6 eggs. For us, we actually have 4 whole eggs and 4 yolks because we use the extra yolks from our cake. So a great way not to waste here. Now this is a messy process too. But I've always just done it this way. You do it on the counter. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 4 cups of flour. And we're essentially going to make a well. Now I'm just using good old all-purpose flour. You don't have to have fancy flour, but if you have semolina flour or even 00 flour, that works great for this. You don't want to use like a bread flour or a wheat flour. That's just going to give you a different texture and consistency on it. So all-purpose, or if you have the bougie semolina or the 00, you can use that. We're going to make our well. On here. Now, before I mix in my egg into our well, I'm going to add in about a teaspoon of salt. Let's do. That one has coconut flavor on it, so I don't want to put coconut flavor in there, so I'm just going to use my hand. Around a teaspoon of salt and about a tablespoon of olive oil. Now, you can do it without the olive oil, but I find that the olive oil makes it hold up better in the water boiling process. But that is something that is not an essential component. You can literally just use eggs and flour. Now, this is where I always say it makes very messy. So make sure I have my crater big enough. We'll pour it in here. I'm going to scrape all of this egg in here. And you can also just crack your eggs in there and give it a stir. But since I already had my yolks in here, I just decided to mix it all in here. And now we're just going to try to incorporate this. Now I'm going to tell you this is going to spill out because it always does. But trust the process by the time you get done. This is like that machine where it's got to like pull its guts in before. That's what we do here. And apparently I feel like doing this in a bowl is probably a cleaner method, but that is just not how I've ever done it. There we go. And you're kind of creating this nice drier shag for it. And of course, my cake thing tells me that we're about ready for it. I'll come grab it in just a second. Let me get this shag off my hands first. But we've got a good start to this. And then we're going to start kneading this into a cohesive dough. It's going to be a very stiff dough to start with, but we saved it before it ran over there. Okay, let me give my hands a quick wash, but let me see if I can get as much of this dough off before, because I don't want to waste any of it. There we go. Wash my hands. Let's check on our coconut cake and see if it's ready. And then we'll get back to kneading.
Do you use 6 whole eggs for your pasta?
Yes, you can definitely use 6 whole eggs. I just opted to use my extra yolks instead. You can also use all yolks. If you use all yolks, you just kind of need to double it up. Let's see. Firm, 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 firm. They're ready to come out. Perfect. Okay, let me grab. You know what I'm going to do? Let me grab my Tribits out here. We're going to make a line, and then I'll just come and bring them over here and let them cool. You're going to beep at me for ages. Okay. I'm going to bring them down here, and we'll let them cool over here. Now, when you make your cakes, and we do our layers, so your cake has to cool completely, but you're going to be cutting off the tops of each cake so you have a flat, level cake. Now, if you don't want to have any waste, what you can do is you can save that and a little bit of your coconut frosting, and then you can make coconut cake pops where then you dip them in chocolate, and so they're kind of almost like a Mounds cake pop with that leftover bits. But here, just beautiful, golden kissed and touched. We'll let them cool for a few minutes before we flip them out, but they should be nice, and with that parchment paper on there, they should flip out easily. Okay. There we go. I'm gonna wash my hands, and then we can get back into kneading, but I'll probably check on my chicken real quick. See if we're ready for flipping that one first. Okay. And then we'll get back to kneading here. Let's see. Not quite yet, almost there. I'm gonna turn this up just a smidge on there, but we'll have our chicken tenders here. That's what my kids are gonna be having for lunch, and some fresh fruit. But now it's time for us to finish up our pasta part for this. Let me grab a little scraper here to bring in all of this base into our dough. Now your dough, again, is going to be firm and dry. What I like to do is I will add little bits of water as I'm kneading so that I don't put too much in. But you don't want it to be too wet because, again, you want it to be a firm dough that kind of comes together. So you're going to mix it as much as you can and squeeze it together as much as you can until you're like, I can't do this anymore. That's when you're going to add a little bit of water. But you've got to go through those like trials and tribulations of this is too hard to work with. Go through that first, then you add a little bit of water. I'm going to take my bowl here that has a little bit of that yolk in it. I'll mix it up. That way I can bring a little bit of that in here. And then you can also just get your hands wet during this process and allow it to kind of soak in. So we'll add a little bit at a time. And honestly, how much additional water you add is just going to vary about what size eggs you used, how full your cups were on there. You know, sometimes it's just a tablespoon or two. Sometimes it can be a bit more. But what you don't want to do is add too much to where your dough is really soft. You want it to be firm and hard, but yet you want it to come together. Because what we're going to do is we'll wrap it up after we knead this for a good hot minute. You're going to wrap it up in plastic wrap. And then that dough will sit on your counter and it will hydrate. So it will be softer when you're ready to roll it out. It needs a minimum of 2 hours of sitting before you really use it. But once you get there, then it will be nice and velvety soft. Okay, let's go for our next round of water, adding in. And I'm adding in just about a tablespoon or so at a time. And I try to hit where the driest parts are first. And a little bit of water can go a long way with dough. So again, you don't want to overdo it, and then you have to add more flour in. There we go. And the stiffer, firmer your dough now, the better it's going to hold up when you're making your ravioli or you're boiling it. It's going to prevent it from getting too spongy and too soft. But this is where a good pasta dough, they say you want to knead for about 10 minutes, which is a long time, especially if you are not used to kneading. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse here because I'm ready to flip my chicken, and then we'll add our next little round of water. Okay. It should be nice and crispy. Beautiful. We'll flip these over. Perfect. Nice golden brown. Beautiful. I'm going to rotate up on here. We've got our focaccia sitting there, which is nice and ready. I'm going to bring some wet hands over to my kneading process. Help these dough come and form together. And you can see how it's slowly bringing its shape together. And this is why I say, don't do your arm day on this day. This is your arm day. I always wonder how these little old Italian grandmas, they're out there still making their pastas. I see these videos all the time and I'm like, I know how tough that dough is. So I was like, you must be in great shape. And they're like 101, still making pasta for their family. And I'm like, I'm dying. And I'm like 37. Okay. Just about ready for wet my hands again. So when you're getting close like this, don't just pour it in, just wet your hands. And that's going to give you just enough liquid to get you there. Because as you can see, it's starting to come together. Okay, let me wet my hands. There. And knead. And with our kneading technique, I'm essentially pushing it and dragging it across the countertop. There we go. And you can see it's slowly forming together with our dough. And again, the stiffer the dough, once you've got it in there, without too much, is going to give you, when you wrap it up, it's not going to be like this when you hydrate it. It's going to be much softer. So don't think, oh, this is what it's going to be like when we roll it out. No, it's going to be a lot softer and smoother. But if you make it too soft now, then it will be too loose later. Here we go. Whew. And another workout. Whew. And you got on here. That's why I always say, this is why pasta is not one of my everyday things for it. It's delicious. And once you get to the part where you're rolling it out, it's not that hard. But this step right here is like your biggest workout. Okay. Give this again another. We're going to let it sit for just a second. I'm going to wash my hands. We should be able to take our coconut cakes out because you want to take them a few minutes out from the oven so that they don't stick at all. So we'll transfer them. And then our chicken should be ready. we can do a stretch and fold on our focaccia. So you guys can see kind of what that is. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to layer it with parchment paper, that way none of it sticks to when I want to take it off. So we should have a nice thick layer here. I'm going to rotate my chicken pan here. And with these, they should pop over. Beautiful, golden here. I'm actually going to put the round side down because remember, I'm going to be cutting off the tops. That way, if it sticks at all to our parchment paper, it's already coming out. If you go to flip it like this and it doesn't slide out yet, don't force it. Just take your butter knife and just slowly around the edge. Some of them, they'll fold out perfectly. Some of them just need a little help, but don't force it out on there. Still once it's stuck up here. Because you don't want it to tear. There we go.
You have a question about parchment paper. Is it all the same, or are there certain brands that are better?
So certain colors of parchment paper can handle higher heat. So the white ones typically can handle around 400 or so degrees, 450, then they start to color. The browner parchment papers typically can handle a little bit higher heat, like 500, a little bit more. And that's if you're going to do like longer cooking times in it. I find that this parchment paper I can use for both sourdough, which I do at 500 degrees, but it's only at 500 degrees with a lid on for about 20 minutes. So it's kind of protected on there. But yeah, there are like temperature variants for it and thicknesses. So a thicker parchment paper, one that's less opaque or more opaque, will be able to cook a little bit longer. Beautiful. And these have just a wonderful coconut aroma to them. And then I'll get our last one on here. Beautiful. And now we'll let these cool. And then we'll make a coconut frosting, a coconut buttercream frosting for later. And that will allow them to layer between it, and then we'll put sweetened coconut on it. Let's check our chicken here. Just about. Let's do a stretch and fold on this, and then I think we might bid you adieu for a little while, and we'll tell later since it's just lots of kneading on our dough. Okay, for our focaccia, we're gonna do kind of what I say a stretch and fold. It's again a lower hydration dough than a sourdough, so you can manipulate it a little bit more for it, but you still want to help build that gluten up in there. So stretch it, fold it around. You're just going to do this a couple of times, and then we'll be ready to stretch it out on a baking sheet, coat it in some oil, and let it do its kind of rising there for our final little for bake up tonight. Okay. But not like a super wet, high hydration like a sourdough. Okay, I think we might be ready for this chicken. Okay, beautiful. We'll take this rounds out. Gorgeous. And again, pretty easy, something I can whip up fairly quickly while making my cake for the kids. And kneading and kneading and kneading our pasta dough. Well, guys, it is time to say goodbye. because I've got a lot more kneading to do here, and this isn't fun cooking showing here. But I'm essentially going to knead this for another 5 to 10 more minutes until it's completely nice and elasticy. Then I will wrap it up in plastic wrap, but I'm actually going to divide it up into probably 4 or 5 balls and then wrap them up. That way it's a little bit easier passing them through my thing later. But we will be on tonight for making ravioli with this. But again, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made, coconut cake, pasta, and chicken tenders, and you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking and baking gears. I've got my hand mixer, my stand mixer, my Hexclad pans, bowls, cutting boards, everything that I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.